Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. 5 pages into The Assistants, you know you have a hit on your hands. The New York Times declared it Camille Perri's debut as 9 to 5 meets Thelma and Louise. While The Hollywood Reporter next broke the news that when Kate Med Cassidy proved so popular with readers, HBO Max, under its Warner Max movie label, opted to develop a film adaptation of the romantic comedy novel. Book Riot more recently celebrated Social Animals as a funny and sharp social commentary on community, privilege, dog ownership, and the ultimate power of finding your people and your pets. And she joins us today to talk about it all. Camille, welcome to the show. So, how young could we have first found you connecting with storytelling?
I was always very into, so I grew up with two older sisters who were 10 and 12 years older than me. And for the period of my childhood where I couldn't yet read, I was furious about it. Like I really, really wanted to be able to read because they could read. We could all watch TV and enjoy a story together. And I was always watching stuff that I was too young to watch because I had teenagers for sisters. But I'd see them doing their homework or studying for a test, and I would be super jealous of that. So I tried to learn to read as quickly as possible. Um, and once I did, I definitely fell in love with stories. I've always known I wanted to be a writer since forever.
Way to go living that dream. Who do you count as any academic cheerleaders along the way while you were studying towards your BA in English at New York University, or then your master's of library science from Queens College?
Since I figured out what a story was, I was trying to write my own.
Yes.
So many teachers were wonderful to me. I had one particular art teacher in high school who really took me under her wing. Her name's Cynthia Eagle, and my mom actually passed away my senior year of high school, and I would go and spend a lot of my off periods in the art room working on art projects. Sometimes I'd cut class and go work on those art projects. It was just a really rough year for me, and she just created this safe haven in her classroom and allowed me to go there. And there was always music playing, and I could work on whatever art project I was working on. So it wasn't necessarily a writing related thing, but definitely allowed me to have a creative outlet through a really tough time in my life. And I had a safe space every day that I could go to. But other than that, libraries in general, as soon as I got my first library card, I loved the library. I loved that you didn't have to have money to get whatever you wanted at the library. So that's always sort of been like I'm a kid at a candy store at a library, always.
So, leading up to the creation of your first published work, how do you feel looking back that your time working impressively as the books editor at both Cosmopolitan and Esquire, helped give you a rounding as a reader most authors don't always have time to benefit from, especially in how it might later filter down as a rich reference well to draw from within their own writing?
Definitely aided me. Working in magazines, and I started out just as an intern at small literary magazines. Eventually, I made my way to Esquire and Cosmo, and I was covering books for them. But I started out at a, a magazine called Open City, and then I was a slush reader for the Paris Review for a little while, and I learned so much from reading through the slush pile. I think that was the best learning experience I could have had as a writer because there's stacks and stacks of these things, right? And you're going through them and you got to go through them quickly. And you're in that position where you start to realize that a lot of things sound alike. And it might be, you know, you might be a great writer, but if you don't have if you don't catch someone on that first page and you don't have some sort of hook, it sounds super commercial to say that, but even in literary stories, you know, you need something that's going to sound different from every other story that a reader has just read. So something that really jumps out. I also learned the difference between just sort of in terms of like what a story is that I would pass on to an editor and one that I would reject. The differences were pretty vast. You would kind of know it within like the first couple of sentences that you had someone who you were in a writer's hands who knew what they were doing in a way. It really is. You hear like agents and editors say like, "Oh, I only read the first 5 pages or whatever," and it sounds so awful if you're a writer. But I think that the reason people say things like that is because once you've done your 10,000 hours or whatever, and you've figured out you figured out sort of the secret password and how to start a story, a, a seasoned reader can recognize it right away.
On display in your debut, The Assistants, which we understand was a case of art imitating life, as Variety reported you actually wrote the original draft while working as an assistant to the editor-in-chief of Esquire.
When I wrote The Assistants, I was working as an assistant to the editor-in-chief of Esquire magazine. And one of the things that I used to do was his expenses. And at the time, I did not have a lot of money. I was not earning a lot of money, and I had a lot of student loan debt. And I was thinking one day when I was doing his expenses, like, you know, when you're an assistant, you have so much access to sometimes very powerful people their whole lives.
Now, how did that create a brainstorm then manifest itself into the creation of character Tina Fontana, who we meet as a 30-year-old assistant to a media mogul? She doesn't dream of moving up the corporate ladder or breaking into show business. She's proud of her job, and she should be. She's good at it. But her salary stinks, and in her dank ground floor apartment, she drinks out of jam jars and sleeps under a leaky ceiling. Before it hit you that she could solve some of her most pressing financial problems by taking advantage of a technical error within her boss Robert Barlow, CEO of the Titan Corporation's expense reports to surreptitiously pay off her student loans. And with Volume 1 Brooklyn rooted on as a character that gives the world the call to arms for an entire generation strapped down by debt.
And I just got this thought in my head where, like, not necessarily my boss, I had a great relationship with him, and he wasn't like a billionaire or anything like that. But I just thought, well, if I were the assistant to someone like really, really powerful, if I weren't an honest person, right? You could really rip these people off, like because you have all their account numbers and everything. So I thought, well, I'm not going to do this in real life, but how could I turn that into a story? And that was how The Assistants was born. Tina Fontana is doing her boss's expenses, and one thing leads to another. There's a mistake, there's an error, and next thing you know, she's using her boss's expense account to pay off her student loan debt, and it just snowballs from there. The thing about the boss and the assistants is he's not a true villain, because I wanted there to be a real tension. Tina loves this man, in a way. And in a way, they have a very like fatherly, daughterly relationship in a way. Because you do get close to your coworkers. And if you're an assistant to your boss in particular, in a way where you're spending so much time with these people, they almost feel you're seeing them more than you're seeing your real family, right? So you really develop, and sometimes it could be like a Stockholm syndrome situation where if you're getting kind of abused by your boss, and if it's that kind of thing, you kind of keep coming back for more. And I didn't want that in the novel, but I did want sort of a little bit of tension of, there's things about this guy. He's not necessarily a bad guy. He's not necessarily evil. He just lives in his own bubble. That's like the main thing he's guilty of. Just as a lot of us do. So I was thinking of lovable characters who are highly flawed. Um, this is an old, I think we're about the same age, but I was thinking of J.R. Ewing from Dallas. That was one of my models for the boss and the assistants. Kind of like the guy you love to hate and you hate to love.
There are some very specific rules that you set out for this book. Could you talk about coming up with number one, all important men must have assistants? Number two, men rule the world. Men rule the world still. And three, there is enough money. And how they stay relevant is thematic guideposts of stories throughout the story.
The rules came from my love for the novel Fight Club, where there were very well-known rules, right? Do not talk about Fight Club, blah, 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 blah. That was sort of in my head. I had reread Fight Club around the time that I was working on The Assistants. The original version of The Assistants was a lot more. It was like a lot more. It was rougher and more political and a little angrier and a little dirtier, and it was a little bit more Chuck Palahniuk's kind of thing. So I had been reading that. It was like a little more revolutionary. I softened a lot of that up. And one day, the quick story is like that was that version. And then I was watching the movie 9 to 5 and it occurred to me, I'm like, oh wait, I'm not writing Fight Club. I'm writing 9 to 5. I'm like, okay, I got this. Let me rework this whole thing. But the rules stayed because I liked them. I just thought they were catchy and it really put things into perspective in a concise way for the reader.
Now, once Tina and her cubicle co-conspirators hatch this scheme to hijack their boss's expense account to pay off student loan debt, the plot soon takes on a life of its own, Cosmopolitan teases. Who did you have the most fun with teaming her up with here reluctantly, like Emily, who busts her in the act and wants in, or say Kevin, among others?
The vibe between Tina and Emily is always something people really enjoyed. Um, the lesser characters, the sort of B characters were there's some ways I think if I were to write that book today, I would update. I would change, I would kind of maybe do things a little bit differently, but that's just maturing as a writer and changing and evolving. But I think the dynamic between Tina and Emily, I think I got something really magical there. Something about their friendship. And there's another example, as we were speaking earlier, of characters who bump heads in the beginning. They don't necessarily like each other. They seem like total polar opposites, but over time they start to realize things that they have in common, and they even have a certain chemistry, and then they start to like each other. One question I would always get from readers, especially after my second book, When Katie Met Cassidy, which was a queer rom-com, and because I'm gay, people are always like, so what was really going on with Tina and Emily? Like, did they get together? And I was like, no, like they're just friends. They just become friends. It's not like that. But I think that there were some readers who wanted that from them. But hopefully they'll just read my second book and get that fix.
Set against the twinkling backdrop of New York City with an unforgettable cast of queer supporting characters, BuzzFeed rooted on this vibrant novel is one that feels like it's just waiting for a big screen adaptation. When you look back over a decade later, it must feel good to know this is still a favorite among so many readers.
The Assistants is a well-loved book, and I'm so thankful for it. People still I mean, that book came out in 2016, and I still have people messaging me that they just read it and loved it. It's a lovely thing to have.
Now, have you ever considered caving to fandom man and catching everybody up on where Tina and the gang are 10 years later? Perhaps even maybe through a streaming show script?
I will not do it. I don't think I'll do an Assistant sequel. However, I actually don't know if I'm there's been some new movement with I have to speak vaguely, but there has been some new movement with the assistants screen rights that is just kind of happened. It had been tied up for a really long time, and it's sort of in a place now where there are some new people involved, and I'm crossing my fingers that an assistance adaptation might actually still be possible. I think of that as if it becomes a TV show or something like that, there will of course be a showrunner and new writers, and I'll just step back and let them have that story. But I do hope that that happens so that I could see it on screen and see what new developments come to those characters if it is a show where it'll have more than one season. Um, I am working on a new novel. It's still very early stages, but I'm super excited about it. And yeah, it's too fresh to talk about. But I think that with Social Animals coming out, as you know, when you have a book coming out, it can be super stressful because you get to a point where all the stuff that you are focusing on is stuff out of your control. You've written the book, you've finished the book's been edited, you've handed it over, and now it's all like publicity and marketing and how's the book going to do and who's going to pick it up. And a lot of it, you don't have control over any of it as an author. And I find that incredibly anxiety producing. So I thought the best thing that I could do is just try to put my energy into writing the next thing. It was a good decision, I think.
Let's face it, the big fat sappy Hollywood romantic comedy has been declared dead in recent years. The genre's largely dried up at the major studios, with part of the purported struggle being that traditional ideas of romance, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy marries girl, no longer feel representative of modern lovers. But in the realm of queer love stories, there are definitive signs of life, with Vogue spotlighting When Kate Met Cassidy as a delightful suite set As a delightful, sexy, sweet example of a welcome psychic break from the tropes of rom-coms past, blissfully free of tired bro BS and women made to chase emotionally unavailable men with the ultimate goal of diamond rings and white weddings. Instead, Katie, a basic yet spirited heretofore straight woman, explores the bounds of her sexuality with Cassidy, who's a commanding, confident, sexually potent presence who's sure to turn on readers across the sexual spectrum. Please talk strategically here about your decision, which they argued was the most powerful of all, to avoid bogging the story down by death and disaster, and instead allow it to blossom in its own magical little world, with witty banter and real estate porn, and a tingly sex story shopping scene with all the makings of a Gary Marshall or Nora Ephron classic, except for the fact that it's not a boy, but a girl who's falling for the girl.
It's a great question because there wasn't a lot out there at the time in mainstream media. There's always been small publishers and niche sort of audiences where if you're looking for queer content, you can find it. Especially once we had the internet, if there's something out there for everyone, right? So if you were looking for queer stories, you could find them. I found myself in this position where my first book, people liked it. It was doing really well. I sort of had the ability to kind of write whatever second book I wanted to write. And I thought, well, I'm at I'm at Putnam, right? It's Penguin Random House. It's a mainstream publisher. There really hadn't been a real mainstream queer romantic novel that had certain representation of people with, different genders or and different sexualities. So I thought it was a great opportunity. And I was in a powerful position to be able to try to do it. So I think in a way, When Katie Met Cassidy was a little bit before its time because if it were written today, if it were out today, I think it would just, fortunately, there's a lot more queer fiction out there. There's loads of it now coming from all different kinds of publishers. So, but I think when it first came out, I don't know that necessarily people knew what to do with it. I don't know that necessarily even my publisher knew how to market it. And so there were a lot of firsts with that book, but I'm incredibly proud of it. And I will say that of all my novels, I get the best letters from people like on Instagram and messages from people saying how touched they were by it or how they felt seen by it. Even now, I still get messages from people saying, like I grew up in a religious household. I had, really conservative parents. I was really struggling with my sexuality. I didn't know, I wasn't sure. And I read your book and it made me realize things and it helped me come out. And that's just so like, there's nothing better than that.
Now let's meet three drastically different women as People magazine helped introduce them, Val, Alex, and June, who stumble upon a connection while frequenting a dog park. And what initially intrigued you within the differences between them before they find this common ground as Val is a tough-talking private investigator, Alex is an introvert with a suspicious past, and June's an athlete turned housewife who funnels her attention into her dog. And equally as importantly, the dogs who co-star here in Social Animals.
Val and Alex and June are all vastly different personalities. Um, and I thought that they also needed to have vastly different dogs. I knew that Val, as someone who didn't really want a dog, she's only gotten this dog for her PI work. She thinks of it as she's renting this dog out and then she's going to resell it, right? I knew that Val was going to have to get a dog that was way too much for her to handle. And I have a Brussels Griffon, which is the breed that Val gets, and they are little maniacs. They are not the best dog for first-time dog owners, which I was a first-time dog owner when I first got my Griff. So I knew immediately that Val was going to be getting a Brussels Griffon. And June, I knew was a softer sort of personality. I think of June as very light and bright and just sort of warm. And I was thinking, well, what kind of dog should June have? And I thought a golden retriever, she technically has a golden retriever mix, because I imagine June would have gotten her dog would have been a rescue, and it wouldn't necessarily be a purebred dog. So I knew that she was going to have a golden retriever. And Alex, I was thinking, well, what would Alex have? And Alex is kind of tough. I think of her as a little bit a little bit gender neutral in a way. Like she's not like a girly girl and she's not. So I was like, what kind of dog is just like a dog, like a classic American dog. And I was like, a beagle, Snoopy. So that's how I chose their dogs. But I definitely gave every every character in the novel, I thought very long and hard about what kind of dog they would have and also what kind of name that dog would have. So when I first got the idea for the story that was to become social animals, it actually, this is going back, but it started out as a script that I was trying to write. And it was how I created the characters of Val and Alex. And it was sort of a, a, like a Thelma and Louise type buddy comedy. They were going to solve crimes. And I developed these characters and I quickly realized, well, this isn't gonna work. But I would love to pull these characters out and put them in a novel and then and just figure out a new plot for them. It took me a long time to figure out what the setting was going to be and what the inciting incident was going to be. And that was when I got my dog and started going to the dog park. And all of a sudden, it just hit me one day where I was like, oh, it's going to be a dog park. Like that has to be it. So I knew Val and Alex, and then I created the character of June to sort of be the thing that brings them together. So I wanted to start the novel with Val's voice because I think of it as sort of we get all their points of view. So I think of it as about all three of them, but I think Val is sort of our anchor character. So I wanted to start with her voice. Um, and through through Val, I wanted then to sort of get into Alex, but I wanted Alex to be sort of mysterious. So I didn't want the reader to necessarily know what to make of Alex in the beginning. So we get Alex's voice second, but it's sort of cryptic a little bit. You don't know what's going on. She's going to be going to this dog park under false pretenses. And then third, you get June's voice. And June is sort of she's sort of the most I think of June as sort of the most normal of the three, but she has her own loneliness and problems with social connection. But June is sort of a voice of truth in the novel, and so we get all three of their points of view. But I wanted to kind of show how these three people who normally wouldn't have really mixed now all of a sudden are mixing, and there's a lot of friction between the three of them.
When Val's hired by June's husband to find out if she's cheating on him, it sets these three women on a collision course. Book Riot raved among singing the praises for your colorful cast of characters who spend time together, and dialogue's the lifeblood of how a cast like this would ever.
I always write dialogue first. Um, I create a character first. I figure out sort of the that character's general personality and what they want, and what they need, what they don't have. And I write longhand in notebooks before I really start writing a novel like in earnest on the laptop. I always sort of do brainstorming in my notebooks, and it's always I just hear their voice. It's like they start talking to me. So I'm just writing down bits of dialogue that may or may not end up making it into the novel. But I feel like I need to know how a character speaks and sounds before I can move ahead with anything else. And I do plot ahead. I do plot outlines that are, pretty vague, and a lot of times they'll change over time. But in terms of what a first draft of a first chapter is going to look like, there's very little exposition, a lot of dialogue, and a lot of me putting in like emotion TK. I'll figure out the emotional resonance of this scene later, but this is like I'll start with the dialogue and the action and what's happening in it. That always comes first. Oh yeah, the characters become super real to me, and I'm living with them so closely for so long as I'm writing because novels, at least for me, take many years to write. So it's like they're friends in your life. And sometimes you're just out and about and a line will come into your head and it'll be I'd have Val in my head saying some sarcastic remark, and I'd be like, oh, that's a Val line, and I'll have to write that down. I'll put it in my phone. Well, I think characters that sort of dislike each other are very interesting, and I really like flawed characters. I think not necessarily evil characters where they're like beyond help, but I like people behaving badly. And I like characters who are maybe trying to do the right thing, but it's not necessarily in their nature. So that was definitely a big part of, I think that's in all of my novels, but in Social Animals particularly, I knew that these characters were each in their own way a little bit socially inept and that they were a little bit lonely, each of them, and that they were really wanting connection but didn't know how to do it. I wrote this novel during a lot of it during the COVID restrictions, and there was a lot of isolation. So loneliness was on my mind, and how if you don't use that muscle of of being social and making small talk, I realized, oh, you can kind of lose it. So that was what I was thinking of for these characters.
A zinger of the novel, full of heart, that Marie Claire argues proves that sometimes all you need are a couple of friends and maybe a dog or three to find your pack. What surprised and inspired you about the magic of friendships forming and the unexpected ways they can in life as they did for this troupe by the end of the
I
story?
thought about, well, what kind of relationship are these three characters going to have? And I knew right away that Alex and Val in particular were going to really bump heads. I really wanted them to sort of not really like each other in the beginning and bump heads, and then over time realize that they're as different as they are the same. They are also very similar. And I wanted there to be a tiny little bit, because you find out it's kind of a spoiler. I guess spoiler alert. Um, they are both gay women, and I wanted a question in there of like, are these two characters going to be friends? Are they not going to be friends? Are they going to be lovers? Are they like, so I wanted those stakes to really feel really, 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 I wanted it to be a like a nice knotted ball of what's going to happen. Like I wanted tension for them. I have so many multiple versions of the ending of this novel. It can end in various ways. And the ending that is in the book, I think of as up for interpretation in a way. And I think of it as an ending that is also a beginning, which is sort of my favorite way novels tend to end. I always, you get attached to characters and stories, and I hate I mean, the only true ending to anything is death, right? So, even in a rom-com or something, oh, they kissed or they get married, whatever, but they still have to wake up the next day. And I always wonder what's going to happen in 5 years? What's going to happen in 10 years to these characters? So when I'm writing, I always I want to leave some things open in my ending for a potential sequel if people really love the book. If it's going to be made into a TV show, I want it to have legs. So, there's a business side to it too, but really it comes from just in my heart. I really like endings like that.
As someone as roundly read as you are and as experienced writing reviews of books alongside writing them yourself, what can we draw from your wealth of advice that could serve anyone giving the craft a shot?
The advice I always give to new writers is input is as important as output, because a lot of times people put pressure on themselves to write every day, get those hours in, or they give themselves like word count, you know, minimums. And I think that could be counterproductive a lot of times. I think sometimes if you're stuck, the best thing to do is close the laptop, pick up a novel, pick up a short story collection, a book of poetry, go see a play, go see a concert, put on your favorite TV show, whatever it is. Go to a museum, look at some paintings. Just like let your brain light up. Let it just different parts sort of become engaged. And I think that's the best way to get unstuck, and to just spark inspiration and creativity.
Camille, it's been inspiring talking today. Thanks so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Thank you so much.